Well, hello YouTube, and welcome to Friday's edition of The Breakfast Club with Got That Funk. Thank you for joining me. I also wanted to thank Agent of Doubt for his video response to my video last week, which was called Rebel Rebel. His video was yesterday, and it was called Don't Go It Alone When Deposing Tyranny. And, I absolutely agree with Michael in the sense that, if you're going to try to overthrow the government, you need a movement of people to do it. A few rebels here and there are never going to do anything. And quite frankly, even if every single gun owner in America decided that they had enough of the way the government was going and wanted to overthrow the government, you're going to lose. Against tanks, Apache helicopters, drones, etc., satellite surveillance, you're going to lose. You're going to lose. So armed insurrection is the stupidest idea in the world. Now, in Michael's video, he went to pains to point out to me some of the historical background of the Second Amendment, conversations between James Madison and Thomas Jefferson in letters. And Michael, to be fair, I do remember an entire class of my U.S. history when I was in high school where we discussed the exact quote that you brought up about Thomas Jefferson when he said the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. And I am aware that Thomas Jefferson thought that it was prudent or perhaps even desirable for there to be a revolution once every generation or so. Why should the new generation just go along with the way things had been done by the old generation since they didn't have anything to do with setting it up? That was his sort of logic at the time, as far as I can recall. But let's be clear, Thomas Jefferson, though hugely important he is and was in the formation of the United States of America, Thomas Jefferson isn't the government. Thomas Jefferson, his opinion is one man's opinion. That all by itself does not give the context to imply that the purpose of the Second Amendment is to enable the citizens to rebel against the government. My other recollections from my U.S. history class in high school, which are pretty vivid because it was one of the only classes I actually liked in high school, was that there were arguments going around at the inception of the United States as to whether or not we should have a standing army. And I think it's my recollection that we weren't supposed to have a standing army, and that one of the reasons that citizens were given the right to bear arms was so that they could be called up to serve if we went to war. But during peacetime, the United States was not supposed to have a standing army. This is reflected in the state constitutions of some of the original 13 states. I think like Vermont and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania come to mind, where they specifically mention that having a standing army is antithetical to liberty. Free people can't be free if there are soldiers among them with arms. That was the sort of logic at the time. So the logic at the time was, you're free because you've got the arms. You don't need to have soldiers protecting you because the soldiers who are protecting you could be working for a despotic government. I think we have long since moved on from that situation now. We've had a standing army for scores and scores of years now. I don't even know how long. When we finally decided to form a permanent standing army, I haven't really looked into it, but I do know that at the beginning of the United States that wasn't the idea. Also, the well-regulated militias that the Second Amendment mentions, and it says being necessary to the security of a free state. I mean, they use those words for a reason, and the reason, as I can recall from high school, is that in the slave-owning states, all able-bodied men had to participate in slave patrols. The purpose of slave patrols was to put down rebellions by slaves because in some places blacks outnumbered whites, because they owned more slaves than were in their sort of towns and villages. So there's that. So the slave rebellion, putting slave rebellions down was one of the main functions of the slave patrols, and also to capture and return runaway slaves. So I think you could make a strong argument for saying that the original purpose of the Second Amendment, worded the way it was worded, was to keep the southern states in the Union, because there was concern expressed in the Constitutional Convention by some of the southern people that the northern states would be able to basically bring an end to slavery, abolish slavery, simply by abolishing the right to bear arms. Because, as I say, all able-bodied men in the southern states were required to participate in slave patrols from time to time, and that necessitated them having their guns. So, at the time the United States was formed, there was a lot of compromises because some states didn't want slavery at all, and some states did, and there's an awful lot of parts of the Constitution that go into that, which were nullified by the 13th Amendment. Unfortunately, the Second Amendment didn't get included with that nullification, and I think it would have been prudent back in 1865, at the end of the Civil War, for them to reconsider the Second Amendment in terms of the way it was worded and so forth, and either amend it or have abolished it or whatever. But that didn't happen, and we are where we are. From my point of view, though, you can't just point to Thomas Jefferson and say, oh, that was the original intent behind it in the Constitution. No. The original intent behind it in the Constitution, if you really want to go there, was A, the slave patrols, and B, the fact that we weren't supposed to have a standing army at all. And so people had to have their own arms so that we could call them up to service if necessary. So that's where I'm going to leave that. Now, for this week's topic, yeah, that's right, I got a different topic. I want to talk about the extremely worrying situation that's going on right now with Donald Trump and his administration, and his ratcheting up tensions. While I was asleep last night, the United States bombed Damascus in Syria, the capital city. Now, when you bomb a capital city, that is an open act of war. We've been bombing Syria off and on now for at least 5 years that I'm aware of. And I've never been okay with that. I've made several videos talking about my objections to that over the past few years. I think that the United States military interventionism is A, irresponsible, B, politically unwise, and C, immoral. And D, it is probably also illegal in terms of unconstitutional and illegal as far as international law is concerned. Because you're only supposed to use military force against another country when you have an existential threat against your own. And that is not the case with any of the drone wars that have been going on. And now with Trump ratcheting up the air war against Syria, who is a client state of Russia, which is a nuclear-armed power, we are sort of drifting into an area where we could literally be talking about a nuclear confrontation if things escalate out of control. And let's be honest, even if you're a major Trump supporter, you cannot pretend at all that Trump isn't the kind of person who will escalate just because it's in his nature to do so. One-upmanship is Trump's main sort of strategy, I think. And this all does not bode well for, of course, for the people in Syria, but also for people in the United States as well. We can't get into any kind of a hot war with Russia. There's no good way that can finish. There's no good way that can work out. Even getting involved militarily against Syria has enormous implications. For example, why hasn't the Congress demanded that the United States gets congressional approval before these acts of war are taken out? President Trump is acting beyond the scope of his authority as outlined in the Constitution. That's a fact. And if that's not enough of a reason for you to take up arms against the government, okay, fine. But then don't give me this bullshit about why you think you need your weapons to commit armed insurrection when the government, abrogates the Constitution, because that's just happening in front of our fucking faces, and I don't see any kind of armed rebellion happening. And don't get me wrong, I don't want there to be an armed rebellion, of course. Having said that, I don't know what it's going to take to rein Trump in from his warmongering buddies that he's just taken on his team. Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, the pair of them together, pretty much complete the Neocon coup, which is happening in Washington right now. Again. And we've been down this road before, we don't even know for sure if Assad had used chemical weapons on his own people. We don't know. We haven't had an investigation into that. And, the only official statements I've seen have been from unnamed sources who are fairly confident. And it's just like, what? how can you even report that as if it's news? You know, if you can't name your source, and if that source who you aren't even prepared to name can't even say that they're absolutely sure, come on, man. That's not a good enough reason to commit war against another country, which is what we're doing, and we're inviting war upon ourselves as well at the same time. The United States will not be allowed to get away with this forever. You know, at the moment, thanks to our, supremacy in terms of our nuclear deterrent, there's very few countries that have any chance of challenging the United States in terms of an existential threat. But that's neither here nor there, because you don't have to destroy the whole country to inflict massive suffering. You know, we have major population centers, and plenty to lose if we end up in a hot war with Russia. Even if it doesn't go to sort of full-scale nuclear confrontation, could you afford to lose one city in America? What if they said, we're just going to take out Seattle, just because, just to teach you guys a lesson. Let's show you what it feels like. Boom, gone. You know what I mean? The situation is out of control. The president is out of control. Let me just say that again. The president is out of control. The checks and balances which were put in place by the founders of our country are not functioning right now. Equally worrying is the press in the United States is not doing its duty, in my opinion, of holding the executive to account. As far as I can perceive from this side of the ocean anyway, there isn't any major pushback against this war coming in from the media. The media just takes it as read that Assad used chemical weapons, and takes it as read that that's a sufficient excuse for the United States to do whatever the fuck it wants. No, it's not. Sovereignty means something, or should mean something. If we want our sovereignty respected, it should be incumbent upon us to respect the sovereignty of other countries, which is why we should end the drone wars completely and pull all of our people back in the first place. But it's way too late for that. What we really have to do is rein Trump in before we take a step that we can't step back from. So I want you all to give me your thoughts on that situation, and let me know in the comment section down below. JJ Talks will be here later on with another edition of The Breakfast Club, and I'll see you again on Thursday next week. Thanks for watching, and may all your ups and downs be ups.